Spoiler alert. The movie begins with a boat approaching the Boston Harbor Islands. On board is a U.S. Marshal named Edward Daniels. He is struggling with seasickness, but tries to compose himself. He then goes to meet his new partner, Chuck. During their conversation, Chuck asks if Edward is married. Edward says he was, and a quick memory of his smiling wife flickers in his mind. He explains she died in an apartment fire. He insists it was the smoke that killed her, not the fire, almost as if he's trying to reassure himself too. They shift focus to the case. They've been sent to Ashcliffe Hospital, a facility for the criminally insane. A patient, Rachel Solando, has mysteriously disappeared. The island is isolated by sharp cliffs and jagged rocks. With only one dock as an entry or exit point, one thing is certain: Rachel didn't leave. She's still somewhere on the island, and they must find her. The deputy warden welcomes them as their boat docks, but Edward immediately notices the cold, angry stares from the other officers. Everyone seems on edge. As they get closer to the hospital, Edward feels uneasy. He tells Chuck he has seen electric fencing like this before. Following protocol, the deputy tells them they need to hand over their firearms before entering the hospital. Edward gives his up reluctantly, and Chuck fumbles while pulling his gun from under his pants, looking like a rookie. The deputy thanks them, and as they walk through the facility, one patient makes a shh gesture toward Edward. As they enter, even the nurse greets them with a cold, unwelcoming stare. The place is heavily secured. Dr. Cawley greets them. As they talk, Edward notices paintings on the wall. The doctor explains that in the past, treatments for the criminally insane were harsh. But he has a different vision. He wants to treat patients like real people, with empathy, not punishment or surgery. Edward doesn't agree. He says that people who hurt others don't deserve peace. Dr. Cawley says his job isn't to judge, only to heal. Ignoring the debate, Edward shifts focus to Rachel Solando. Dr. Cawley says she was last seen the night before. When Chuck asks if she's dangerous, the doctor nods grimly. She drowned her 3 children in a lake near her home. She now believes she still lives at home and that the hospital is not real. Edward then asks about her husband. Cawley says Rachel is a widow. Her husband died in the Battle of Normandy. This reminds Edward of the concentration camp he found during the war, the same place he saw electric fences like the ones here. His head starts to hurt, but he blames it on seasickness. The doctor gives him medicine to help him feel better. Dr. Cawley then tells them that officers are still searching the island for Rachel, but no sign of her yet. Then they begin to investigate Rachel's room. The ward assistant explains that when he checked during his midnight rounds, the room was already empty. Chuck discovers that both pair of shoes are still there, which seems odd. The island terrain is very rocky. Edward looks around and finds a note hidden under a floor tile. It reads, "The Law of 4. Who is 67? They wonder what it means. After stepping out of the room, Edward firmly tells Dr. Cawley they must interview every staff member who was on duty the night Rachel vanished. Dr. Cawley hesitates, but Edward reminds him that it's not a suggestion, it's an order, and he'd better comply. They then join the search team. Edward spots a small cave in the cliffs and asks the deputy if it's been checked. The deputy says the area is full of poison ivy and thorny plants. If Rachel's barefoot, there's no way she could have gone in. Still, Edward can't shake his curiosity about the cave. He turns his eyes to the lighthouse next. The deputy quickly tells him it's been searched. It was empty. With the daylight fading, they end the search for now. Back at the hospital, Dr. Cawley gathers the staff, just like Edward asked. One of the ward assistant admits he left his post for a quick bathroom break, but insists it was only for a minute. Still, escaping seems nearly impossible with the security they have. Getting nowhere, he decides to end the questioning and follows Dr. Cawley to his quarters. There, he meets another doctor, Jeremiah Naring. Dr. Naring is calm, polite, but unnervingly smooth. Edward feels uneasy around him. The doctor starts talking about violence and claims Edward is a man full of fear and violence. Once again, memories from the war resurface and his defense mechanism triggers. He snaps back and starts taunting the doctor in German, exposing that Naring is from Germany. He even points out that the doctor's English still isn't perfect. Before leaving, Edward demands to see the staff files. Dr. Naring refuses immediately. Edward loses his patience and threatens both doctors, telling them the report he'll write won't favor them. He ends the meeting by saying the investigation is over. They're leaving in the morning. That night, Edward has a dream about his wife. She tells him that Rachel is still here and that he can't leave yet. Suddenly, the dream turns into a nightmare. Ashes fill the room, but her body is soaked in water. She gets scared and warns him that the man he is searching for, Andrew Ladis, is also at the hospital. He looks down and sees water dripping from his hands. He wakes up, startled. There's a leaking from the roof above his head. The storm gives Edward the perfect excuse to continue investigating. Since he's denied access to the staff files, he asks the doctor if he can question the patients who were present during Rachel's therapy session instead. This time, the doctor agrees. The first patient brags about the cruel things he's done to the nurse caring for him. Sensing the man's sensitivity, Edward begins scratching his pencil across paper. The patient begs him to stop. Edward doesn't. Instead, he grabs him and asks about Andrew Ladis. The patient screams but insists he doesn't know the name. A different patient asks Chuck for a glass of water. As soon as he leaves, she snatches Edward's notebook and scribbles something in it. Edward reads the message and looks shaken. When he asks her about Andrew Ladis, she panics and rushes away, refusing to say more. Later, Chuck asks Edward who Andrew Ladis is. Edward says that Ladis is the man who started the fire that caused his wife's death. He also found out that Ladis was sent to this hospital. So when the Rachel case came up, Edward chose it on purpose. He wanted to use it as a way to find and finally confront Ladis. Edward thinks everyone at the hospital are hiding something, so he decides to search for more proof independently. He and Chuck go to the cemetery. Maybe Rachel or Andrew is there. Chuck admits he noticed the patient slipping Edward a note. Curious, he presses Edward about what it said. Edward doesn't want to answer at first, but Chuck asks Edward to trust him. Finally, Edward shows him that the note carried a chilling message. Run. As the storm rages outside, they take shelter inside the tomb house. Chuck asks Edward what he plans to do if he ever finds Ladis. Edward pauses. He tells him he's seen enough death and violence in the war. He won't take out Ladis. He's done with that kind of violence. He then reveals the real reason he came. While researching the hospital in his search for Ladis, he discovered that they've been secretly experimenting on people's minds. And nobody wants to talk about it. He believes something terrible is happening here, and he came to expose it. He won't allow this kind of horror to go on in his country. Chuck starts to freak out. What if Edward is asking too many questions? What if this entire mission was a setup, and they were never supposed to leave the island? Edward starts to worry too. What if Rachel's disappearance was staged just to lure him in? Suddenly, the storm rips open the tomb house doors, flooding the room with light. The deputy has come looking for them. As they prepare to leave, Edward turns to Chuck and says they have to work together now if they want to get off the island. At the hospital, they're given new clothes and cigarettes. In the meeting, they hear Dr. Cawley and Dr. Naring arguing about a potential flood in Ward C. Cawley wants to move the patients, but Dr. Naring says it's unnecessary. Ward C holds the most dangerous patients, and visits there are only allowed with Dr. Cawley and the deputy present. As they discuss about the number of patients present in Ward A, B, and C, Edward speaks up. He finally understands the meaning of the note from Rachel's room. There are 66 patients, including Rachel, but the note asked, "Who is 67?" That means one more patient is unaccounted for. Just then, Dr. Cawley changes the subject by announcing that Rachel has returned. They rush to see Rachel. She looks confused and asks why strangers are in her home. Dr. Cawley gently explains that the officers just have a few questions. Edward asks where she was yesterday. She calmly replies, she went swimming in the lake. Then she suddenly says Edward is her husband and hugs him. Her face twists in anger, and she shouts that she already buried him. The orderlies grabs and restrain her. After this incident, Edward's head starts hurting again. The doctor gives him some medicine, and he finally passes out. He begins to have another nightmare. This time, he sees Rachel and her child at the concentration camp. Suddenly, they open their eyes, and the child asks him why he didn't save them. Edward stumbles backward and finds himself in a room with Andrew Latis. Latis says, "No hard feelings, right?" Then, Edward hears a scream. He finds himself with Rachel again, and she shows him her drowned children at the lake. This shocks him awake. The door opens, and to his surprise, it's his wife. She tells him that Latis is still here and begs him to take revenge. As she hugs him, Edward wakes up for real this time. Chuck asks if he's feeling better and informs that the backup generator has failed, and the staff are scrambling to control the patients who have escaped from their wards. It's the perfect chance for them to sneak into Ward C. Edward is desperate to find Latis. He runs after an escaped patient, leaving Chuck behind. The patient attacks him and tries to choke him, but Edward fights back hard. An officer arrives with Chuck just in time. The officer tells Edward to stay away from the patient as they take him back to his room. Edward uses this moment to keep searching. He hears a familiar voice in one of the cells and thinks it might be Latis, but it turns out to be the same man who once told Edward about the secret experiments at the hospital. He blames Edward for being here in the cell. He says they'll take him to the lighthouse next for more experiments. Edward promises to help him, but the man says that there is no escaping this place. He tells Edward that if he wants to be free, he have to let her go. He begs Edward to let her go. Then Edward sees a vision of his wife, and she reminds him of their past. Edward says he can't let her go. The man warns, if he doesn't, he'll be trapped here forever. Before Edward leaves, the man tells him that they took Latis to the lighthouse. Chuck rushes in and warns Edward that Dr. Cawley and the deputy are coming. They quickly escape, and Edward decides they need to sneak into the lighthouse. When they reach there, Chuck hesitates. It's getting dark, he says, and climbing down is risky. Frustrated with his partner, Edward decides to go in alone. As he gets closer to the lighthouse, he scans the area, but the lighthouse is inaccessible from this spot. When he returns, Chuck is gone. He then sees a cigarette on the edge of the cliff and then spots a body on the rocky shore. He begins to climb down, worried that something happened to Chuck. But when he gets there, the body is gone. From there, he sees lights coming from the cave he had spotted earlier. He wonders if it's Chuck. Edward begins to climb toward it. But instead of Chuck, he finds a woman hiding inside. She warns him to stay back, but he says he's not a threat. When he asks if she's Rachel Solando, she says yes. She used to work at the hospital as a nurse, but when she spoke out against the secret experiments, they called her crazy and started putting drugs in her food. She warns Edward not to eat their food or smoke their cigarettes. He now sees that the cigarettes were part of their plan. Dr. Cawley also gave him the drugs. The woman tells him it's only a matter of time before they call him insane and trap him here forever. The next morning, she tells him to go. Edward wants to help her, but she tells him the ferry is the only way out and they control it. She also advises him to only trust himself from now on. Back at the hospital, Dr. Cawley talks to him once again. He says Edward is free to leave now that Rachel is safe. Edward nods. But when he asks where Chuck is, the doctor frowns. "Who's Chuck?" he asks. Edward stays calm. He agrees that there was no Chuck. He suspects that they've taken Chuck and silenced him. Later, he secretly grabs his tie and decides to sneak into the lighthouse. But he runs into Dr. Naring. When Dr. Naring questions him, Edward notices him pulling out a syringe. Without hesitation, he takes him down and injects him with the syringe. Next, Edward sees Dr. Cawley's car and uses his tie to set it up for an explosion. His wife appears again, begging him to stop, to forget Chuck and Latis. But Edward is focused. He won't leave without Chuck. He lights the tie and ducks for cover. As the car explodes, he sees his wife with a child by her side, but they remain untouched by the blast. Ignoring what he's seeing, Edward rushes to the lighthouse. He knocks out the guard and climbs the stairs, expecting to find some kind of lab. Instead, Dr. Cawley is already there, calm and waiting. Edward points his gun, but Cawley reveals that the gun has no bullets. Dr. Cawley calmly reveals the truth. Edward Daniels doesn't exist. He is Andrew Latis, the hospital's 67th patient. He was sent here 2 years ago after he killed his wife, Dolores. The pain broke him, and he made up a new name and life to avoid the truth. Edward thinks this is just a trick and keeps asking about Chuck. Dr. Cawley explains that Chuck isn't a marshal. He is Dr. Lester Sheehan, Andrew's personal doctor. They let him act out his made-up story as a new kind of therapy. They hoped he would remember what really happened. Rachel Solando was never real either. Her and Edward Daniels are just mixed-up versions of Andrew's and Dolores' real names. Dr. Sheehan comes in and says it's all true. He begs Andrew to stop running from the truth. Andrew's wife reappears. She begs him to run once again. Though devastated, he finally remembers everything. Their children, the lake, her being so calm. He remembers shooting her. Andrew begins to fall apart. His head hurts and he collapses. When he wakes up, he says he remembers everything now. He recalls the tragedy, his wife's actions, and how he shot her afterward. He admits he is Andrew Latis, the man he cannot forgive. Dr. Cawley is hopeful. He thinks they may have finally helped him, but he is careful too. They had reached him once before, and he slipped back into his false identity. This will be their last attempt, Dr. Cawley says. Andrew must not relapse into his fantasy world again, or the only remaining treatment will be a lobotomy. The next morning, Andrew sits with Dr. Sheehan outside. Dr. Sheehan asks what they should do today. Andrew says they need to escape the island. He calls Dr. Sheehan Chuck. Dr. Sheehan lowers his eyes, heartbroken. He subtly signals the other doctors, who appear equally disheartened. But this time, Andrew asks Dr. Sheehan a question. Which would be worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man? Dr. Sheehan is confused, unsure if Andrew has truly relapsed. Andrew leaves peacefully with the orderlies.